Language Foundations Vocabulary Flashcards, helping you achieve understanding.
Assign a specified, usually proper name to. Make a prediction about. Tell in advance. Order, request, or command to come. She was called into the director's office. Utter a sudden loud cry. Pay a brief visit. The mayor likes to call on some of the prominent citizens. The option to buy a given stock, or stock index or commodity future, at a given price before a given date. A demand by a broker that a customer deposit enough to bring his margin up to the minimum requirement. A demand especially in the phrase. The call of duty. A telephone connection. She reported several anonymous calls. A loud utterance, often in protest or opposition. Greet, as with a prescribed form, title, or name. She calls him by first name. Demand payment of a loan. Give the calls to the dancers for a square dance. Get or try to get into communication with someone by telephone. I tried to call you all night. The characteristic sound produced by a bird. Make a demand, as for a card or a suit or a show of hands. He called his trump. A brief social visit. Senior professors' wives no longer make afternoon calls on newcomers. A demand for a show of hands in a card game. After 2 raises there was a call. An instruction that interrupts the program being executed. Pascal performs calls by simply giving the name of the routine to be executed. A request. Many calls for Christmas stories. Ascribe a quality to or give a name of a common noun that reflects a quality. He called me a bastard. A special disposition, as if from a divine source, to pursue a particular course. A visit in an official or professional capacity. The pastor's calls on his parishioners. Call a meeting. Invite or command to meet. The 1C conference was called to discuss the final solution. Challenge somebody to make good on a statement. Charge with or censure for an offense. He deserves to be called on that. Challenge the sincerity or truthfulness of. Call the speaker on a question of fact. Consider or regard as being. I would not call her beautiful. Declare in the capacity of an umpire or referee. Call a runner out. Indicate a decision in regard to. Call balls and strikes behind the plate. Lure by imitating the characteristic call of an animal. Make a stop in a harbor. The ship will call in Honolulu tomorrow. Order or request or give a command for. The unions called a general strike for Sunday. Order, summon, or request for a specific duty or activity, work, role. He was already called 4 times for jury duty. Read aloud to check for omissions or absentees. Require the presentation of for redemption before maturation. Rouse somebody from sleep with a call. I was called at 5 a.m. this morning. Send a message or attempt to reach someone by radio, phone, etc. Make a signal in order to transmit a message. Hawaii is calling. Sports, the decision made by an umpire or referee. He was ejected for protesting the call. Stop or postpone because of adverse conditions, such as bad weather. Call a football game. Utter a characteristic note or cry. Blue jays called to one another. Utter in a loud voice or announce. He called my name. Assign a specified, usually proper name to. Look on as or consider. Assign a specified, usually proper name to. Look on as or consider. Assign a specified, usually proper name to. They named their son David. Give or make a list of. Name individually. Give the names of. Give the name or identifying characteristics of. Refer to by name or some other identifying characteristic property. Many senators were named in connection with the scandal. Family based on male descent. He had no sons and there was no one to carry on his name. Determine or distinguish the nature of a problem or an illness through a diagnostic analysis. Charge with a function. Charge to be. She was named head of the committee. Identify as in botany or biology, for example. A defamatory or abusive word or phrase. A well-known or notable person. They studied all the great names in the history of France. Make reference to. His name was mentioned in connection with the invention. Create and charge with a task or function. A language unit by which a person or thing is known. His name really is George Washington. A person's reputation. He wanted to protect his good name. By the sanction or authority of. Halt in the name of the law. Mention and identify by name. Name your accomplices. Regard something as probable or likely. Make a prediction about. Tell in advance. Be excited or anxious about. Act in advance of. Deal with ahead of time. Realize beforehand. Be a forerunner of or occur earlier than. This composition anticipates Impressionism. Make a prediction about. Tell in advance. Make a prediction about. Tell in advance. Indicate, as with a sign or an omen. Foreshadow or presage. Make a prediction about. Tell in advance. Indicate, as with a sign or an omen. Make a prediction about. Tell in advance. Indicate, as with a sign or an omen. Make a prediction about. Tell in advance. Grounds for feeling hopeful about the future. There is little or no promise that he will recover. Make a promise or commitment. A verbal commitment by one person to another agreeing to do, or not to do, something in the future. Give grounds for expectations. The results promised fame and glory. Promise to undertake or give. I promise you my best effort. Order, request, or command to come. Utter a sudden loud cry. Utter aloud, often with surprise, horror, or joy. Shed tears because of sadness, rage, or pain. A slogan used to rally support for a cause. A cry to arms. A loud utterance of emotion, especially when inarticulate. A cry of rage. A loud utterance, often in protest or opposition. Proclaim or announce in public. Before we had newspapers, a town crier would cry the news. A fit of weeping. Had a good cry. Bring into a particular state by crying. Demand immediate action. This situation is crying for attention. The characteristic utterance of an animal. Utter a characteristic sound. The cat was crying. Utter a sudden loud cry. A small valley between mountains. Complain. What was he hollering about? A very loud utterance, like the sound of an animal. Shout out. He hollered out to surrender our weapons. Utter a sudden loud cry. A very loud utterance, like the sound of an animal. Cry hollow. Encourage somebody by crying hollow. A joke that seems extremely funny. Utter a sudden loud cry. Sharp piercing cry. Her screaming attracted the neighbors. A high-pitched noise resembling a human cry. He heard the scream of the brakes. Utter or declare in a very loud voice. Make a loud, piercing sound. Fighter planes are screaming through the skies. Utter a sudden loud cry. Utter aloud, often with surprise, horror, or joy. I'm here, the mother shouted when she saw her child looking lost. Use foul or abusive language towards. The angry mother shouted at the teacher. A loud utterance, often in protest or opposition. Utter in a loud voice. Talk in a loud voice, usually denoting characteristic manner of speaking. My grandmother is hard of hearing, you'll have to shout. Utter a sudden loud cry. Utter in a very loud voice. Utter a sudden loud cry. Make high-pitched, whiny noises. Blow in a squall. When it squalls, a prudent sailor reefs his sails. Sudden violent winds, often accompanied by precipitation. Utter a sudden loud cry. I yelled to her from the window but she couldn't hear me. Utter or declare in a very loud voice. You don't have to yell. I can hear you just fine. A loud utterance of emotion, especially when inarticulate. A yell of pain. A loud utterance, often in protest or opposition. Pay a brief visit. Cause to be returned. Demand payment of a loan. Make a phone call. Call in to a radio station. Summon to a particular activity or employment. Summon to enter. Take a player out of a game in order to exchange for another player. Come to see in an official or professional capacity. The governor visited the prison. Go to certain places as for sightseeing. Did you ever visit Paris? Go to see a place, as for entertainment. Talk socially without exchanging too much information. Pay a brief visit. Impose something unpleasant. The principal visited his rage on the students. A temporary stay, e.g., as a guest. A meeting arranged by the visitor to see someone, such as a doctor or lawyer, for treatment or advice. He scheduled a visit to the dentist. A sale. He was visited with a terrible illness that killed him quickly. Stay with as a guest. Every summer, we visited our relatives in the country for a month. The act of going to see some person in a professional capacity. A visit to the dentist. The act of going to see some person or place or thing for a short time. He dropped by for a visit. The act of visiting in an official capacity, as for an inspection. The option to buy a given stock, or stock index or commodity future, at a given price before a given date. An option to buy. A demand by a broker that a customer deposit enough to bring his margin up to the minimum requirement. A demand especially in the phrase lay claim to, as of an idea. Take as an undesirable consequence of some event or state of affairs. The accident claimed 3 lives. Demand as being one's due or property. Assert one's right or title to. He claimed his suitcases at the airline counter. An established or recognized right. A strong legal claim to the property. An informal right to something. His claim on her attentions. An assertion of a right, as to money or property. His claim asked for damages. An assertion that something is true or factual. His claim that he was innocent. Ask for legally or make a legal claim to, as of debts, for example. They claimed on the maximum allowable amount. Assert or affirm strongly. State to be true or existing. He claimed that he killed the burglar. Demand for something as rightful or due. They struck in support of their claim for a shorter workday. A telephone connection. He placed a phone call to London. A telephone connection. Utter aloud. Often with surprise, horror, or joy. Shout louder than. A loud utterance, often in protest or opposition. A loud utterance, often in protest or opposition. Put an address on an envelope. Social skill. Give a speech to. The chairman addressed the board of trustees. Written directions for finding some location, written on letters or packages that are to be delivered to that location. Speak to someone. Computer science. The code that identifies where a piece of information is stored. Speak to. He addressed the crowd outside the window. The act of delivering a formal spoken communication to an audience. He listened to an address on minor Roman poets. Greet, as with a prescribed form, title, or name. He always addresses me with, sir. Act on verbally or in some form of artistic expression. Access or locate by address. Address or apply oneself to something, direct one's efforts towards something, such as a question. Adjust and aim, a golf ball, at in preparation of hitting. A sign in front of a house or business carrying the conventional form by which its location is described. Direct a question at someone. The manner of speaking to another individual. He failed in his manner of address to the captain. The place where a person or organization can be found or communicated with. The stance assumed by a golfer in preparation for hitting a golf ball. Postpone indefinitely or annul something that was scheduled. Give the calls to the dancers for a square dance. Recall knowledge from memory. Have a recollection. Call up memories. Bring forward for consideration. Call to arms. Of military personnel. Get or try to get into communication with someone by telephone. Cause to become available for use, either literally or figuratively. An order to report for military duty.
Become our student and get access to effective and free educational materials. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to become a part of our growing YouTube community and to learn English effectively.